Thanks so much for joining me. President Biden has dismissed Republicans' latest offer for infrastructure plans. The president spoke with West Virginia Senator Shelley Capito about the deal Friday. She offered another $50 billion for the plan, but the White House and Senate Republicans are still miles apart on how much to spend and where the money should come from. CBS News correspondent Christina Ruffini is at the White House with more.
Lana, the phrase, "let's make a deal," might be popular on a certain game show, but here in Washington, not everyone is thrilled at the prospect of President Biden making a bargain with Republicans to get their buy-in on his infrastructure plan. A small group gathered outside the White House Friday to protest compromise.
Biden, which side are you on?
Some progressives argue that the president shouldn't give in to Republican demands on his infrastructure bill.
Now's the time to accelerate the process we've been making.
The original plan called for building not just roads and bridges, but a stronger social safety net at a cost of $2.3 trillion.
We have a chance to seize on the economic momentum of the first months of my administration, not just to build back, but to build back better.
Republicans balked at the price tag and a plan to pay for it by raising the corporate tax rate and increasing taxes on high-income earners. President Biden has since offered to lower his ask to $1 trillion, but the parties still can't agree on how to pay for it.
One of the suggestions that we've made to the administration is to repurpose some of this extraordinary amount of money that's gone out to state and local governments across the country.
Republicans want to redirect unused COVID relief funds for some of the infrastructure projects. The White House does not.
He's obviously come down quite a bit in what he originally proposed, and hopefully they'll have more they can add to their proposal.
President Biden spoke by phone Friday with Senator Shelley Capito, who's leading negotiations for the Republicans. The two plan to speak again on Monday. But if all that talk doesn't turn into action, Senate Democrats have signaled they're willing to go it alone. The president is also proposing a new way to pay for that bill, and that's a 15% minimum corporate tax. That's because 55% of major U.S. corporations paid zero federal income tax last year. Lana?
Some progress. All right, Christina, thank you. Joining us now for more on this is CBS News political reporter Grace Segers. Grace, great to have you. So Senator Capito offered an additional $50 billion towards an infrastructure plan, but President Biden rejected that offer. What can you tell us both about his decision as well as the idea that he might start speaking, in addition to Senator Capito, with other members of the Republican Party?
So White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said yesterday in a statement after the call between Capito and Biden that, unfortunately, from the president's perspective, Capito's offer just didn't go far enough in addressing his objectives. So one of his biggest complaints was that the additional $50 billion didn't address job creation as pertaining to climate change and climate-related jobs. President Biden has said that's a really big priority of his, and he's argued that the Republican proposal doesn't do enough to address climate-related solutions and infrastructure. So that was really one of the biggest problems between the two of them and one of the biggest sticking points. Also, the two of them can't seem to agree on how to pay for it. As Christina mentioned, Biden has proposed raising the corporate tax rate. But for Republicans, this is really a non-starter because they don't want to do anything that would undo the 2017 tax cuts that were signed by former President Trump. So really, we're at an impasse here between the Senator Capito and President Biden, and it's unclear whether even after they speak on Monday, the two will be able to reach a deal.
Yeah, and what about this idea, though, that President Biden might be reaching out to other senators in a way perhaps to bypass Senator Capito? Do you have any idea who else he's speaking with?
There are a few other opportunities for Biden to negotiate. So Republican Senator Mitt Romney is leading his own bipartisan group of 8 senators, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, that are considering looking at some kind of infrastructure proposal. Senator Romney has called himself kind of the back burner for infrastructure negotiations if Senator Capito's talks don't go well. So it's possible that he could be talking to that group. President Biden will also definitely be in contact with Senator Wyden, who is the Finance Committee chair, and he's in charge of figuring out how exactly they're going to pay for all this. And with Senator Sanders, the Budget Committee chair, and obviously a huge voice on the progressive left, who will be able to push back against some of the overtures that Biden has made to the Republicans. Sanders has said in particular that he's ready to move forward towards budget reconciliation to pass infrastructure bill, and that wouldn't require any Republican votes to pass. So Sanders and many other progressives are considering moving forward.
But it would require 2 Democratic senators who are more moderate that have indicated that they're not yet ready for budget reconciliation as opposed to a bipartisan agreement. We know how this goes, Grace, back and forth, and the last time with Senator Capito offering her last proposal. Do we know what the White House is likely to make as concessions to the infrastructure plan next?
I would be surprised if the White House made any other considerable concessions. As far as President Biden is concerned, he's already lowered his offer first from $2.3 trillion to $1.7 trillion, and then said that he personally is willing to consider $1 trillion in new spending. So from the White House perspective, that's really making a lot of concessions already. So I would be surprised if they continue to make any further concessions, because from their perspective, they've already done a lot. Of course, then from the Republican perspective, they haven't done enough. So it's really kind of a problem of neither party being able to see eye to eye here and being able to reach that middle point.
And Grace, in London, the G7 finance ministers have agreed to terms on a 15% global minimum tax. The agreement would close cross-border loopholes used by some of the world's largest companies to avoid taxes. So what does this agreement mean, and how would it work?
So this feeds into President Biden's proposal for using a minimum global tax on corporations to help fund the infrastructure plan. And the G7 is a group of 7 wealthy countries. So it signals that there's a commitment among these wealthier countries to say to corporations, look, you have to start paying your fair share. You need to do at least 15% in minimum corporate tax. But there are a couple of sticking points here. First of all, this needs to be approved by the G20, which is a larger international group of countries that includes several developing countries, as well as G7 wealthier countries. So it's not clear if the G20 countries, and there's going to be a G20 meeting next month, if those countries are going to be as eager to accept the minimum tax rate as the G7 countries. And then you also have the problem of Congress needing to sign off on the minimum tax rate in order for this to go into effect. It's really not clear if Republicans are going to accept the minimum tax rate, considering that they're already very against raising corporate taxes from 21% to 28%. So even from their perspective, setting a floor would be raising a tax, and they're against that.
In the final moments that we have left, I want to ask you about jobs here in the U.S. because we got the latest job numbers. The U.S. added more than 500,000 jobs in the month of May. President Biden is highlighting those numbers, but Republicans point out that they fell short of projections. So how are the latest job numbers impacting negotiations on infrastructure?
Well, again, it really is a matter of perspective where President Biden is able to say, look, there's far more jobs this month, more job growth than there was last month. This shows that we're on the right track and we should continue to be following the plans that I've laid forward. And meanwhile, Republicans are saying, well, this wasn't nearly enough jobs that were added this month. So this shows that President Biden should be making more concessions to us. So I think, unfortunately, we're in the case where both parties can use these numbers to their advantage and to forward their own narratives about what the economy needs. And I don't think that will necessarily convince either side to make concessions in the infrastructure negotiations based on these numbers alone.
All right, Grace, thank you.
Thank you.